Welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast, hosted by divorce financial analyst and retirement planning counselor Andrew Hatherley. Join Andrew and guest experts as they help late-life divorcees build the financial and mental foundation for a meaningful future. There is life after divorce. Now, on to the show.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Great Divorce Podcast. Regular listeners to the podcast will be familiar with my exhortation that there is life after divorce. Today's guest is a testament to that. In December 2016, Jeff Opdyke was divorced at age 50 after a 25-year marriage. 2 months later, his life was again shaken when he lost his job. As if to prove that bad things come in threes, his grandmother and great-aunt, who had been a big support to him through his divorce, soon passed away within months of each other. I'm not going to give away the next couple of chapters in Jeff's story, but suffice it to say, things got a lot better. Divorce opened possibilities for Jeff to create a new life for himself, to rebuild his career and finances, to further his dreams of international travel, and to pursue his passion for screenwriting. I can't wait to hear Jeff's story, and I think you'll enjoy it too. Jeff, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. Just to let our listeners know, I'm speaking to you from the Pacific coast of, not the Pacific coast, Pacific time zone, Las Vegas, Nevada, and it's 8 p.m. here at night. And I see that the sun's shining in the background. We're doing this conversation on Zoom. You're in Thailand, and was it 10 a.m. in the morning?
Yeah, it's 10 a.m. I'm on the island of Koh Samui. My new wife and I, we live in Portugal year round, but we are in the process of moving from a little beach community, Cascais, into Lisbon proper. And the timing between when our lease ended and when we are going to get a new lease in September meant we pretty much had the summer free to go do something. And so we decided we're going to go live in Thailand for the summer. So we are living on the island of Koh Samui in this beautiful little villa, which I'm actually going to write about for International Living magazine, which is my primary employer, because it's really interesting that we're spending for the entire month, actually it's a little longer than a month, about $5,000 for a absolutely phenomenally beautiful villa. And all our food that we eat, because we eat at some really cheap roadside restaurants that are incredibly good. But you can't do that anywhere in America. Spend an entire month on the beach for $5,000. So I'm going to do a story on sort of living luxuriously in Thailand for the summer, really cheaply.
Geez, that sounds great, and I do want to get into the cost of living aspects of living internationally. Perhaps also for people who might not be able to afford a $5,000 villa. I know you can. I've seen online that there's actually some really nice places for substantially less in Thailand and overseas. But I imagine the place you're staying would probably be twice that here in the U.S.
Actually, the villa is about 3,200. I'm talking about including all our food and all the things we do. That adds up to about $5,000 for the month.
Well, that's
great. The villa itself is about 3,200.
Well, that's great. So I'm curious, you mentioned remarriage, and that's something that I want to get to in a few minutes, and living in Portugal. I know recently I had a conversation with Jennifer Stevens, the executive editor of International Living magazine, and we went over the annual global retirement index and the best places in the world to retire. And certainly Portugal has been among the top places in the world over the last few years. And perhaps we can get into that in a few minutes. But first of all, I'd like to hear a little bit about your story. I mean, the podcast is the Great Divorce Podcast. I was divorced at 52. You were divorced at 50. We have some similarities in that we both work in the financial world. You were a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, and I'm wondering if your divorce experience was anything like mine in terms of the impact. I referenced a minute ago the divorce and then losing your job and then losing two family members very close to you. I mean, the latter two things didn't happen to me. I can only imagine how much more difficult it was for you. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about that time period, late 2016, early 2017, and what it was like for you. Hopefully, not bringing up too terrible memories.
No, no, it's all okay. It really started in 2007. And that is when I was offered a job with the Wall Street Journal to be based in their Hong Kong bureau, covering all of Asia, which is a dream job for me. I grew up traveling the world with my mom, who worked in the airline industry. And this was back in the 70s and 80s when airlines gave each other's employees reciprocal travel rights. So we would fly all over the world for free. So I grew up literally a citizen of the world. I would spend weekends in Guatemala, or we'd cross the Andes from Chile into Bariloche, Argentina, or we go to India, I'm one of my very first grocery shopping experiences as a human being was, I still remember as a 10-year-old being sent to a supermarket in Germany with a bunch of German marks in my hand and a list from my mom and her best friend on what I needed to buy. I was like a 10-year-old American kid wandering a German supermarket on his own. So I grew up traveling the world, and I really wanted to live overseas and work overseas at some point in my life. So I had that opportunity in 2007, and we went to Hong Kong to sort of scope out the place, find an apartment, or find a place to live, find a school for our son to go to, etc. And along the way, my wife just decided, no, we're not going to do this. And so all of this process we'd already begun, selling our house. We sold a lake house that we owned. All of these processes suddenly fell apart. And my ability to sort of live out what was truly a dream died in an instant. I mean, there was no talking about it. It was just, we're not doing this. And from that point on, our relationship kind of weakened because I was truly disappointed in that decision. And I ultimately ended up taking another job. I mean, this is sort of, I'm going to sort of add an interrogatory here, or sort of a little side commentary. I truly believe sort of the universe works its own magic. I mean, it sort of gets you where you need to be through processes that are not always comfortable. So back to the main story, I ended up with a job in about 2010 with a company based out of Delray Beach, Florida, called the Sovereign Society at the time. And they hired me to basically be their Asia writer. So they were sending me to Asia all the time to write about Asian economics, Asian stock markets, Asian investment opportunities, et cetera, et cetera. So I ultimately ended up getting the job I wanted, or the lifestyle I wanted, I should say. But that created a lot of additional strain on the marriage, because I was traveling to Asia a lot, and I was, it wasn't like 2 or 3 days. I mean, when you travel to Asia, it's a long trip, and I was there for 10 days to 2 or 3 weeks at a time. And my wife was still at home with our son and our young daughter that we had adopted in 2003. And so those events sort of put the divorce in motion slowly over time. And by 2016, we just grown apart, and we kind of grown apart, and we got divorced. And 2 months later, I lost my job at the Sovereign Society because of some management changeovers that had happened. And like you said, I was living in my grandparents' house, the ones that my grandparents had raised me. So I was living in their house, taking care of it, while my grandmother and my great aunt were both in assisted living centers. And I would go visit them. They were, 2 cities apart, even though they lived together. They'd, been 2 cities apart at the time. And I was taking care of their house, and suddenly one died, and then the next one died pretty quickly. So it was at that point that I was divorced, had no job, had no family members left except my kids, and I was thinking, what do I do with my life? Losing losing a job immediately after divorce, I got to say, is really stressful because divorce is an expensive proposition, as you know. Probably one of the most expensive purchases you can make in life is a divorce, and losing your job immediately after that adds tremendous stress because the cost of the divorce and the cost of the alimony and the cost of the child support, all that kind of fun stuff, suddenly you don't have an income. And that just creates an additional level of stress beyond the divorce itself. So I was in that situation and I was thinking, what do I do with my life? I was trying to find freelance writing opportunities, but, they really weren't bringing in the kind of income I was accustomed to. I mean, with bonuses and whatnot, I was probably bringing in somewhere north of 200,000 a year, and I went down to zero a year. And the freelance income was maybe, a couple hundred to a couple $1,000s a month, which was clearly nothing. And so I just said, to hell with it. And I want to go use this opportunity to rebuild my life into what I want to be. And so I decided to sort of chuck my life in South Louisiana, where I was living at the time, and move to Southern California to go back to school at UCLA to be a screenwriter, because I had always wanted to write TV and movie scripts. And so I just decided to use that opportunity to move to California and pursue sort of a lifelong adult dream I'd had of being a screenwriter.
I can't imagine, because my divorce at 52 was bad enough. Just seeing my net worth cut in half, and any sort of future plans of retiring in the imminent future torn asunder. But I can't imagine also having minor children and no job. That must have been as you just said, extremely stressful. So you find yourself at UCLA taking this writing course. It's a 1-year course, is that right?
Yeah, I was part of their 1-year program that was leading into sort of a fellowship kind of thing, where they prepare you for, trying to get on staff in the writing room for TV shows, or that's particularly what I was trying to do. I was trying to be a TV writer, even though the scripts I've sold have all been movies. That said, yeah, it was very expensive. I mean, I got to sort of say that deciding to go back to school is one thing after a divorce and a job loss. Deciding to go back to school in Southern California is probably a stupid thing, because it is not the most inexpensive corner of America to return to school. UCLA is, the 1-year program wasn't like horrendously expensive or anything, but living in Los Angeles, I decided, if I'm going to live in Los Angeles, then I'm just going to go live by the beach. What the hell? I'm 50 years old. I might as well enjoy that year in California. So I rented what was literally a rat box of an apartment. It was probably 300 square feet, if that, dark and dank, but it was like a 12-second walk from the beach in Long Beach. And I was happy with that. It didn't really bother me. I didn't really care about sort of the lifestyle itself. I just had a futon, a desk, and a computer, and that was it. And I basically spent my days at UCLA or at the Writers Guild Library in West Hollywood, where I was reading screenplays every day and writing and whatnot. So that was my life, and it didn't really bother me. I kind of enjoyed it, honestly, because it gave me an immense amount of freedom to just be me. Even though it was expensive freedom because of the cost of living, it was still, I could be me. I didn't have to worry about anybody else anymore, and I could go in and try and build the life I wanted to build for myself. And ultimately, even though I have sold screenplays, it actually, the life I ended up building for myself. And again, this goes back to the universe acting in its own little weird ways to get you where you need to be. I got a call from a former boss at the Sovereign Society who said, "Hey, the folks at International Living have followed you for years. They love your writing. And now that you're free. They want to know if you're interested in maybe writing for them, on a contracted basis, kind of full time. And I said, sure, I'll talk to them. And I got a call from them, and they flew me to Paris for a meeting. They're based in Ireland, so they said, "Well, we're going to be in Paris for something. Why don't you just fly to Paris?" It's like, well, even if I don't get the job, I'm living in Los Angeles. Somebody's going to fly me to Paris for free for a couple of days. I'm not going to say no to that. So, I flew to Paris, had a couple of days in Paris with the high grand poobahs of international living, and they hired me and told me I can live anywhere in Europe I want to live except Ireland, because of some legal issues involved in how the Irish systems work with investment writers. So I chose to live in Prague, and so I went from being a screenwriter in Los Angeles to being an investment / travel / digital nomad lifestyle writer in the capital of the Czech Republic, all in the span of a year.
It's funny how things work out, isn't it? One thing that I picked up from what you just said there, Jeff, is that despite the fact that you're living in a 300 square foot damp box in Long Beach, you still felt fairly content with your life, and I'm guessing that's because that you were in control, and you were moving towards something that you thought about for a long time, and there were no limits on what you could do.
Yeah, I'd lived in California early in my career. I was working, when I first got out of college at Louisiana State University. Um, Very early on, within a couple of months of me graduating, the Orange County Register newspaper in Southern California called me and said, "Hey, why don't you come out here and work for us?" I had been an intern for one summer, and they called me and hired me full time. So I was used to California. I had friends in California, and going back out there felt comfortable for me. It wasn't like I was picking some random part of the world to go to and try and rebuild my life. I was going back to a place that I knew, and a place I was comfortable with, and a place where I had, there was one friend in particular who was a woman I had used to date when I was in California, and we'd been friends for our entire career, basically, even after we stopped dating. And she was out there, and I just sort of rekindled that friendship with her. And being out there, having a friend that I had known forever, and being on my own and doing something that really meant something to me on a deeply personal level, i.e., learning to be a screenwriter. I loved it. I mean, yes, the apartment was a hellhole, but it just didn't. It never really bothered me at all. It was just a place for me to sleep at night, because I spent most of my days, like I said, somewhere else writing or in class. I had a bunch of night classes, so most of my nights were spent at UCLA, and most of my days were spent at the Writers Guild or in coffee shops or out on the beach writing. So it was a really lovely life, actually, even though I was rapidly draining my savings, because, again, Southern California is not the least expensive place to live in America. But there was a contentment and a happiness because I was me. I was doing what Jeff wanted to do and trying to chase the life that Jeff wanted to chase. And I had early success with my screenplays. I was winning writing awards. I won writing awards at the Cannes Film Festival in France. I won in New York, Los Angeles, Atlanta, Amsterdam. So I was seeing the success of what I wanted to do. And while I wasn't making much money, I was still bringing in a little bit of money from winning these awards. And I had found, found somebody else out there who, she and her husband wanted me to do some writing for them for their website. So I was making a little money on the side. So I was making enough where I felt like I'm okay. I don't have to be a bazillionaire living in California to be happy. I have this little dank apartment and I'm making a little bit of money and I'm living the life I want to live. And I was really happy with that.
So when the opportunity, first of all, congratulations on the success with your creative writing, because very few people who dedicate time to writing screenplays achieve that level of success, either from awards. And you've also optioned. Did you say you've optioned some
Yeah,
work?
I optioned a sort of a true story on a little girl from India who became a national sensation for helping the Indian like under 15 girls team win a national tournament or international tournament. So I optioned that. I'm not sure if that'll ever be a movie, but it has been optioned. And I've written a couple of rom-coms that have made it up into the highest echelons of Hallmark and Netflix. Whether or not anything comes of those, again, I have no clue. It's Hollywood; everything is fickle there. But I still have enjoyed the process. The screenwriting process is truly enjoyable to me, even if it never sees the light of day. I just love the process, and I'm happy with that.
Well, this is something that I assume that you can still do and work at alongside your work. Now you were offered. We're back in 2020 here, or no, 2018, where you were offered this opportunity by International Living, and you've moved to Prague, right? So you're in Prague now, and
Uh, yeah, go ahead.
at that time you were in Prague. So you're earning in an environment where the cost of living is less, and I'm supposing that you can also keep up with your creative writing interests as well. No?
Yeah, exactly. So, when International Living hired me, they hired me as a contract writer. I wasn't full-time staff or anything like that, but I was being paid as a full-timer. So, I was getting a monthly paycheck. I would invoice them monthly, but it was on a contract basis. So I was, it was a 3-year contract, renewable every 3 years, and they've renewed it, I don't know, 2 or 3 times, whatever it's been. But yeah, I was in Prague, which I had seen, because of my travels with my mom, just my travels in life. I had seen probably 50 to 55% of Europe, but before I moved to Prague, and I knew that there were certain places where I thought I would want to live. Scotland was one of them, but there is no easy path to a residence visa in the United Kingdom. I thought I would want to live in Barcelona, and I spent a weekend walking all over Barcelona, and I found places I liked. But then I realized the tax structure in Barcelona was ridiculous. So I said, no, I'm not gonna expose myself to that level of taxes after having just gone through a very expensive divorce. And then I looked at Estonia. Estonia said, no, if you can work anywhere in the world, why would you want to work in Estonia? So no, you can't come here. And then I looked at Ukraine as well, because I love the city of Kiev.
Ooh.
But yeah, this was before all the war stuff. But and they said, yeah, you can definitely get a residence visa and a work permit to work here. You just have to hire somebody. It's like, well, I don't want to hire anybody. And then there's Prague. And I love Prague. Prague is one of the most beautiful cities in all of Europe because it still retains a lot of its old world charm. There are buildings there that date back 1,000 years, and it's the only major city from the Second World War era that wasn't bombed in the war, because this is a bizarre fact to know, but Hitler wanted to turn it into sort of a museum of it's sort of the Disneyland of Europe, basically, because he loved the architecture of Prague. So Prague was never really bombed, and therefore Prague retains all of its ambiance from across history. So it's a lovely city. And so I moved there, and because I was a contract writer, I was able to do other freelance work for whoever else. So I had an account with Fiverr and some of the other freelance sites. And I was using my UCLA writing skills for a lot of freelance stuff. So I became a script doctor because I'm really good at writing scripts. I'm really good at writing dialogue and really good at turning bad scripts into good scripts. And I can't tell you how many people I redid their scripts and I ended up winning awards, and some of them got optioned again. So I was using my skills from UCLA to basically bring in a secondary income while living in Prague. And Prague is a great place. If you're going to leave America and restart your life after a divorce, I got to say Prague is a great place for that, because it is affordable, and because the tax rates that I was exposed to, and I don't want to bore people with tax rate structures, but my tax rate in Prague was effectively 7.5% or somewhere in that neighborhood. And because you are an American living overseas, you're eligible in America for something called the foreign earned income exclusion through the IRS. And that allowed me to write off, about $120,000 a year in personal income, meaning I would only pay, self-employment taxes to the IRS. That is a huge tax benefit. It's a huge financial benefit after a divorce, because of you're saving so much on taxes that it allows you to begin to rebuild your financial life. So Prague I thought was a fabulous place to sort of rebuild my life.
Let me ask you a quick question there. I know we don't want to bore people with taxes, but it did. I am a financial advisor, and there is a lot of finance on this call. So let me ask you about the taxes. Does that mean that you can earn up to 125,000 in Prague, for instance, not owe Uncle Sam income taxes, but of course you have to pay some income taxes in in Prague?
Yeah. So the way it works is, in Prague, the tax structure for a freelance person, and Prague has something called the Živnostenský list. It's a freelance visa, basically. It's a freelance permit. It's a freelance work permit, not just for foreigners, but for even local Czechs who want to go off and be a seamstress or a painter or whatever. They have to be on this list so they can pay into the Czech tax system. And the way it works is that they basically write off the first 60% of your income as your cost structure. And then they tax you a flat 18% on the remaining 40%. So you can see right there that your tax structure is going to be really low in Prague. Now, separately, you're going to owe taxes to Uncle Sam, because Uncle Sam has a global tax structure, meaning no matter where you live in the world, you owe taxes to Uncle Sam. And so as part of that, there's also something called the foreign earned income exclusion, which allows Americans living overseas to write off for 2024, I think it's $125,600. So I can write that off, meaning I don't owe personal income on any of that money. And until it's above 125, I don't owe personal income taxes. But what I do owe is self-employment taxes, which is at 15.3%. But self-employment taxes are clearly based on business income. So you get to write off all your home office deductions and all your travel and your meals and all the expenses that go into running a business. So your globalized tax structure when you are living overseas is radically lower than if you had stayed in America. And I moved to Portugal for tax reasons because my tax rate in Portugal is literally 0% because of the tax structure I'm eligible for as a foreigner there. So my globalized tax rate as an American living in Prague is somewhere in the 10% range. So to me, moving overseas after divorce, if you have the capacity to earn a living working from home or whatever, I think moving overseas to that is really advantageous, because the tax structures you will find for foreigners moving into certain countries is so low that it really does allow you to rebuild your financial life fairly quickly.
Let me just put in a plug for the work you do for International Living. You write about this sort of thing in your column in International Living, don't you?
Yeah, I write about this. I write about investment opportunities. I write about real estate stuff, but I also write about, travel things as well. I do a lot of travel writing for International Living. I am, I've sort of oddly become, I guess, the poster boy of what International Living truly is all about, in that I am an American who has decided to move overseas and live overseas and work overseas and build a life overseas. And I take advantage of the tax opportunities that I have, but I also take advantage of a better lifestyle. I take advantage of a lower cost lifestyle. I take advantage of the fact that, when I'm living in anywhere in Europe, I can see all the rest of Europe. I can go into North Africa, the Middle East, all these really cool places, just for travel, weekend getaways and whatnot. And so that makes me kind of the poster boy of what international living really is all about. And I got to tell you, it really is a fantastic lifestyle. I would encourage anybody who has the capacity to work overseas, to work away from home, or to work from home away from the US. I would clearly encourage you to pursue that, because life overseas outside of America is really fascinating. And if you find places like Portugal or the Czech Republic, or even here in Thailand, that are really affordable, you can live such a more fulfilling lifestyle than you will in America, where the cost structure has simply jumped the shark.
Well, let me ask you about that. You mentioned, the quality of life, and you were kind of brought up in an international, as you mentioned, citizen of the world through your mother, and having experienced so much of the world at a young age. What about somebody who's maybe hasn't traveled far afield? Maybe they've gone to Canada or Mexico for spring break or something. What would your advice to them be with respect to potential culture shock? And I haven't asked you about language. I don't know if you speak Portuguese or any other language, but for people who maybe weren't brought up in more the international sort of acceptable or accepting the international lifestyle as you were, what would your advice to people like that be about possibly moving overseas?
Yeah, I understand that it can be challenging and disconcerting and unsettling to leave America, the place you've known for 50 years or more, and to alight in some place like the Czech Republic, which is a former, Soviet bloc country, and in many ways can still kind of feel like that in certain areas. Personally, I find that fascinating. It's something I really sort of gravitate to, because it's just so different, and I love the differences of the world. Excuse me. But in terms of settling in, you actually settle in pretty quickly. I'm just going to use Prague as an example, because it is so different than in what most Americans would understand as normal, I think. The healthcare system is very good, so I didn't have any problems there. I had a number of health, issues I had to deal with wisdom teeth or hurt back or whatever. And the Czech healthcare system is excellent. And when you walk into a dentist or a doctor's office that I went to, you would think you're walking into a place, a doctor's office pick a place in America. It looks the same. The hospitals can look different, because the hospitals are 1940s, 50s, 60s era Soviet design, and they kind of have that weird Jack Nicholson in The Shining kind of feel to it when you first arrive. But when you're in the offices yourself, it's like, oh, this is very Western. It's very 2020 America. So it doesn't, the quality of healthcare is very good.
As long as they don't have twin girls in the hallway and red rum painted on the walls.
Yeah, no, you don't have any of that. The supermarkets, they're different in that they tend to be in European cities. They tend to be much smaller than the Costco's and Walmarts and whatnot that take up 17 football fields across a parking lot, and it takes you 4.5 hours to wander through them because they're so damn large. So the supermarkets in Europe tend to be much smaller. The selections tend to be much narrower. But the quality of food is much better, because Europe doesn't allow all the junk that goes into their food that Americans allow, or that the FDA allows. So there are differences for sure, and there are cultural differences. But to me, it's part of the excitement of living abroad, and you sort of fall into the routine pretty quickly. And there's the language is never, ever a problem. I have never had a problem speaking English anywhere I go in the world, even here in Bangkok, Thailand. I mean, we just we just took, my wife and I just took her son, my stepson, to a dentist this morning because he needed to pull his tooth out because it was falling out. And we walked into the local family dental clinic, and the cashier, or the reservation girl, whatever, she spoke adequate English that we were able to make this process happen. You're going to find far more English in Europe. It's never been a problem. The only place that has ever come up is basically supermarkets, because the checkout ladies tend not to speak English. And some of the systems they have for, like, you have to weigh your own fruit to get a little sticker that says how much it costs. I always forget to do that in certain supermarkets, and they always get mad at me because I'm the dumb American who forgets to do this. But I don't speak Czech, and they didn't speak English, and so that's the only place I've ever really had a problem with English. But I think I would encourage people who have this idea in the back of the head that maybe I want to try this. Don't go full out. Don't go sell your house and move to city X in Europe. If you have the capacity to take a month or two, go take a month or two and live in Europe. Rent some Airbnbs or whatever, and see what it's like. Don't live in the tourist infrastructure, meaning don't go live in a hotel. Don't only eat at tourist restaurants. Go find an Airbnb in a normal part of the city. Like, so in Prague, I would tell you, don't go live in Old Town Prague, because that is the capital of tourism in Prague. I would tell you to go out into Prague 2, or maybe Prague 3, which is, they name their districts with numbers. Prague 2 or 3, which is just outside of Old Town, but it's normal Prague. It's everyday Prague. It's where expats live. And go rent an Airbnb and live there, and walk the streets every day, and eat at the local restaurants, and shop at the local supermarkets, and see how you feel. See if you feel comfortable in that skin. And if you do, then you can use that to know that this is going to be okay for you, that you're going to be able to settle into someplace and live there and enjoy it. And I'm just using Prague as an example. I mean, there are a ton of places I would tell people to consider in Europe, ranging from Lisbon and the Algarve in Portugal, to Malaga in Spain, to even Madrid in Spain, definitely Portugal, parts of Germany. Northern Italy is absolutely phenomenal. Montenegro, Greece, Croatia is lovely. The Istrian Peninsula is basically Tuscany relocated across the Adriatic. So there are a lot of places that I think people should, could go live a very normal, happy life, and it's so much more affordable than you're going to find living in America.
Geez, that's great advice, Jeff. And I'm going to have to talk to you offline, because my wife and I are going to be spending a few days in Istria in September. So if you've got any tips, I'd love to hear it. And what you say about the food, I've never been a big salad eater, but I went to Croatia for the first time last year, and the salads were so tasty. I was eating it practically every day. It was just it was delicious.
Yeah, I've had really great food in Europe. The quality is so much better. Like I said, the selection of items is far, far narrower than you're going to find in America. When you go in the cereal aisle in America, there are 9.87 million different cereals that you can choose from. And when you go to the cereal aisle in Prague or Lisbon or Croatia or wherever, you're going to find 4 or 5 or 6 cereals, and that's it. And it's not the kinds of cereals you would be accustomed to seeing in America. A lot of it's going to be like muesli kind of stuff. You might find like Cocoa Puffs kind of things, or some cornflakes, but you're not going to find a wide variety of food items like you find in a normal American grocery store. And sometimes you're going to struggle to find ingredients. Like when I first moved to Prague, I really struggled to find celery. You couldn't find celery. In Lisbon, I can't find dill anywhere in the world. You just cannot find dill. It will occasionally pop up in a fresh food, in a farmer's market kind of place. But you just get used to this stuff. You kind of grow accustomed to the fact that you're not going to find everything you want at every single location. that you go to. So, if I'm looking for dill in Lisbon, my wife, who is Crimean, knows that she can go to a local Russian market and often find fresh dill there. When I was in Prague, there was an American/British food market that would import a lot of American British sort of foods and treats and whatnot. And I could find certain things there like Pop-Tarts, which is a weird thing, but I love Pop-Tarts. And you can't find Pop-Tarts is not a European thing, I guarantee you.
No.
But you could go to this British American store and you could occasionally find like the s'mores Pop-Tarts, or French's mustard, or little things that you're accustomed to. You begin to find them. You begin to learn where these things are located. It's just that they're never located all in one giant Costco, Super Sam's Club, Walmart, super center that again takes up, an entire city block.
Right.
Just don't find that. Everything is much more compact in Europe, but it also makes Europe a lot more convenient. The transportation is so much easier and whatnot. So I love living in Europe.
Yeah, and it was great advice you offered earlier about for people who may not have the international experience to do a trial run for maybe a month at an Airbnb or a couple of months. I know I stayed 3 months in Mexico before ultimately moving there for 2 years back in 91, 92, and also a year in Barcelona. And but those 3 months in Mexico, just adapting to a different way of life, told me that I could adapt. And it's been an eye-opening experience, and it's worked out great. At least I know that I'm capable of doing the international life if somehow that appeals to me again in the future. I'd be remiss. You've mentioned your wife a few times. It's great that you've reset your life professionally, and with this fulfilling the dreams of the writing and continuing to do good work with your professional writing. But you've also reset your personal life.
Yeah, I met my wife in 2019, I think it was. She's from Crimea, so she's got a weird life. I mean, she was born in the Soviet Union in sort of the Ukraine portion of the Soviet Union, which was Crimea. But she became a Russian because Russia took over Crimea. And so I met her. She's a history professor. She has a PhD in Russian and Ukrainian history, and she was teaching at some naval war college. And we met and kicked off a relationship in early 2019. And then COVID hit. For a while, we were traveling every 2 or 3 months and meeting each other in Greece or in Latvia or Turkey or wherever. And then COVID hit and sort of screwed all that up. And we decided, we're just going to get married because, we really sort of click on a lot of levels. And we ended up, there's only at the time, in the middle of COVID, we decided to get married in December of 2020. At the time, COVID was still screwing up travel, and there was only basically 2 places in our part of the world where we could actually go get married because they would accept travelers from Europe and travelers from Russia at the time. And that was either Turkey or Montenegro. And Turkey had some weird requirements that she had to change her last name and other stuff. And so we decided on Montenegro. So we got married in Montenegro on a cliff in Budva, Montenegro in December of 2020. And been together ever since, and it's been a great life. We travel all over the place together. We spent, I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks in Morocco. We traveled to Greece together. Like I said, we were down in Croatia for probably 3 or 4 weeks down in Croatia and the Istrian Peninsula. Now we're in Thailand for 3 or 4 weeks, thinking about going to Vietnam, but we're not certain if we're going to do that yet. And then we'll head back to Lisbon and get our apartment there and continue our travels in our life.
Well, that's great, Jeff. I suspected at the outset of this conversation that we'd exceed our allotted time, which we have by 15 minutes already.
Oh,
There's so much good stuff to talk about. I appreciate your coming on the podcast and sharing your story with our listeners, which I'm sure will be inspiring to many of them. If people want to follow your writing with International Living, how do they do that?
yeah, the best way is just go to internationalliving.com, and you can actually sign up for my free newsletter. I do I wear a lot of hats for International Living. I'm a travel writer, an investment writer, etc. I write a 4 times a week daily column. It's free. It's called Field Notes, and you can sign up for that at globalintelligenceletter.com. I think there is a link there that will allow you to sign up for my free e-letter called Field Notes.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Jeff. Really appreciate your coming on.
Sure thing.
Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of the Gray Divorce Podcast. To learn more or get in contact with your host, you can visit Andrew's website at transcendretirement.net. Also, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. That helps others find the show, and we greatly appreciate it. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.
Information provided is educational only and should not be construed as legal or tax advice. Each situation is unique and should be discussed with your tax or legal advisor prior to implementation. Andrew Hatherley is not an attorney and does not provide legal advice. Information provided is financial in nature. Advisory services offered through Hatherley Capital Management, LLC. Divorce financial analysis services offered through Wiser Divorce Solutions, an affiliated company.